Welcome to the EchoCast, episode 168, Deity of Conflict. This is a gaming podcast brought to you by me, Morgan, aka Bond Diesel. Please take a moment to subscribe to and rate this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it on. If you're on Spotify or iTunes, please leave a review. If you are on YouTube, please leave a comment for the algorithm. And if you're listening to it on any of the incredible podcast providers, please go to my Twitter, comment on my announcement tweet, retweet it, quote tweet it, maybe join my Discord. Let's chat about it. Do all those things. Help support the podcast, please. Thank you to our Patreon supporters this month: PK, Uber Timmy, Hassan, Christian, Man-Made Golf, Grano, and The Dawn. If you would like to support this podcast and my other content, please check out patreon.com/BondDiesel. Last but not least, please consider contributing to my 2022 Extra Life campaign by clicking on the links in the description, comments, or by checking my Twitter. We've got incentives. If you give more than, I think it's $20, you get something for free in the mail. There's all kinds of stuff. So go over there, check it out, and let's raise some money for some kids and my local children's hospital. On to the news. So we are going to start with God of War PC Edition reaction. So 3-4 years later now, we get Sony's premier franchise on the PC. They've graced us, and it's going well. So the Open Critic score for this right now is a 94 out of 100. I looked, and I believe this is actually a point lower than its score for when it came out on PlayStation, which is wild. That's anything over 90 is crazy. And like this game beat out Red Dead Redemption 2, which to me is one of, well, in my opinion, the greatest game from last gen, at least from a tech perspective. I understand people had their issues with that game, but man, the fact that it was able to beat out God of War was, it says something. And so we have a really good reaction. The reaction for the most part has been very positive of this PC release. I've seen a few little talking points about that. There's a few issues with the controls on mouse and keyboard. This was a game that was obviously designed for a controller, but those things will get figured out probably pretty quickly. So I plan on buying it. So I played every God of War that released through the PS3. I didn't own the PS4, so I never played this one. And so I'm involved in this world. I care about, Kratos and what he has going on. I really want to play it because I'm not really sold on this significant change of what they did here with making it like a very different style of game, where the old God of Wars were much more kind of like a pulled back perspective, and you were kind of experiencing the arena. Now they went and Sony-fied it. So just like most of their other exclusive games, it's an over the shoulder view, and it's, kind of does that thing. Obviously, most people didn't mind this change because it was highly popular. So I do plan on buying it and checking it out. Maybe not immediately. I need to look and see if these games ever go on sale from Sony on Steam. And if they do, I might wait a little bit to check it out, but I plan to eventually. So there was an interesting discussion on the Discord where someone brought up and said, hey, like, what if no other games this year score better than a 94? What if this re-release is the highest scoring game of the year? Should it be considered for game of the year? So my reaction is no, because it's not even like a remaster. Like last year, 2021, my game of the year personally was Legendary Edition of Mass Effect. That was because it was my first experience with that franchise. So to me, it felt like a new game. Obviously, to others, it didn't, and it didn't qualify on most of the major game of the year list. So I don't I think this should get the same treatment, even more so because it's essentially just the same game. It's just 3 or 4 years late for PC platform. I know they did some cleaning up and some graphical stuff to make it work. I think it has DLSS and stuff like that, but um, this isn't even like a remaster. This is just a re-release of the game. So the super good score is extremely notable and expected because it's not like the game was going to get worse. It's still one of the best games ever made. And so, yeah, if this gets any game of the year nods, I'll honestly be kind of annoyed because uh, if that's the case, then Mass Effect should have last year. But that's just my very biased opinion, obviously, as we all know. So I'm really excited to check this out. I'm curious if you'll leave your comments or reply to me on Twitter and let me know what you thought if you've played this. It seems like there's a lot of people kind of waiting to see like it seems like a lot of people already played it on PlayStation, so maybe they just upgrade their PC. They want to do that whole thing. But for people like me, um, I I think I mean I do and I don't understand why the Sony exclusives aren't released day one on PC. I think Sony sees PC as an extension of Xbox, which is a fair thing for them to think. I think that's fair. Um, so they don't want to do that. They want to sell PlayStations. I've talked about this a few times before, but this not releasing on day one is my biggest piece of evidence to say like Sony's still stuck in like 10 years ago when selling the most consoles is what mattered. And they're going to. The PS5 is going to sell more than Xbox. No doubt. That's going to happen. Partially because it has really good exclusives and a huge fan base and um those things, but also because that's their main goal is to sell more consoles. Where it's obvious that Xbox has said, "Hey, they're going to win that race. We'll sell as many Xboxes as we can, but we're not gonna outdo them. Their player base is too big. Really what they're trying to do is convince some PlayStation buyers to buy theirs too, or to play their games on PC. And what I think we're gonna find with services like Game Pass and things like that is that in the future, by next gen, at least on the Xbox side, they're just going to be providing you, and it's what they're doing right now, really. The Xbox will just be a way for you to play their games. It's one way to do it. It's a very convenient way to do it. It's a very nice way to do it, but it's not the way you have to do it. They'll be fine if you want to play on PC, stream it on your phone, buy an Xbox, maybe multiple Xboxes depending on the fidelity you want. Maybe they'll sell a little, streaming box or something that can do some hardware acceleration. I don't know. But there's this weird thing happening where Xbox is more worried about engagement, where it seems like Sony is still stuck in that old school idea of, they gotta sell the most consoles, and they're gonna win that race. And I've seen this before where they've talked about, and it's like car companies, electronics companies, things like that, is that sometimes, certain markets get really stuck in old ways of doing things and they don't advance. And I think that's definitely what's happening with Sony here. The other thing to consider is that if you ever look at the profits of it, Sony is pretty dependent on PlayStation to be successful. Sony is a really big part of their business, and the profit from it is a big part of the profits of their entire company. Microsoft isn't like that. The last time I looked, it was something like Microsoft is worth like 15 or 20 times more than Sony. Like they're not even companies in the same realm. It's almost like comparing like Tesla to GM or something. Like in this space, they are competing, and Sony is trumping them in a lot of ways. But in the grand scheme of things, if you compare Sony to Microsoft, it's like little cousin and grandpa. Like it's they're not in the same thing. So Microsoft can handle if Xbox isn't the most profitable part of their business. They have Windows, they have all this online stuff, the server selling and stuff that they can do. That's where their money is. Xbox is really just a way to get Microsoft in the homes. And I think that this whole day one thing is a big indicator of that. And I saw someone make the argument, well, like, okay, well, this re-release will end up selling them millions of more copies, and it probably will. But I still think that because they said this re-release is a lot of hype. That this is great hype. People are hyped to buy God of War 4 years later. But what I would argue is that that is true, but that there's no hype like a day one release. And I am very confident that if they release their exclusives day one, where the PC people were involved in the same with the console people with the hype of a game about to come out. So when Ragnarok comes out, or when the next Last of Us comes out, or when Horizon Zero Dawn 2 comes out, those games will probably eventually reach the PC. But if they released on PC the same day, I think they would sell in the long run more copies. And that's just my take. But Sony knows that that would mean, I don't think it would be that many fewer, but it would mean fewer consoles in homes of that have their label on it. It would be more people playing on something that doesn't say Sony PlayStation. So I'm really curious to how they're going to evolve in the long run. I don't think they'll change anytime soon. I don't know. We'll see. But we're going to talk more about that shortly. So the next story is Troy Baker and his excursion into NFTs, which is feels like it's a weekly topic now that someone is putting their name to this and then suffering the consequences. So Troy Baker has decided to work with a company that uses AI to essentially make it where they can sell your voice as an NFT, and the people who buy it can use your voice for the metaverse, as they keep saying, or to make content, to make podcasts, to make, video game videos and things like that. That seems insane to me for a voice actor. Now, Troy is probably one of he's probably had the most lucrative career of any current voice actor, and maybe he can afford to do this. And I would imagine the penny being paid by this company to get his voice is substantial. So for him, it probably makes sense, or at least someone sold him on it, right? So the issue is one part of the pushback, other than the typical NFT pushback we've been having, is that other voice actors are like, hey man, like you're literally working with a company who at the end of the day is trying to replace us. One little tidbit I did read about was that he's not actually recording. So in theory, to do this, you would think that he would go to a studio and they would have a bunch of words and noises they would want him to make in order to use this tech to be able to use his voice to make any word that someone types and wants it to say. Apparently, he's not doing that. So my impression is that they're going to use existing stuff, which then that brings a whole nother issue of licensing. And that if they take his voice from other content, video games and podcasts and things like that, well, they don't own that. So I need to read more into that to see how that even works, how they're even capturing his voice, if he's not doing it directly. But so that was a big part of the pushback. The other part was that he took a real arrogant stance on this, and the way he presented it of like, I'm just trying to be creative, and if you don't like that, you're hating. Like it was really weird. Of course, today, the day after, he did the fully expected apology tweet that wasn't really an apology, and basically did the "I'm sorry if you're offended" thing. And still, he said something along the lines of like, "I'm just a creative trying to be creative" or something like that. And yeah, he definitely put himself in a weird spot. Um, my take on it is I feel like I'm like the only person on earth who has always kind of gotten like a weird, like overly cocky, kind of pretentious feel off of him. And I've never actually I'm a fan of his work. He's done some great voice acting. If you play a video game, he's probably in it. So you probably are a fan of him, or at least have heard him, even if you didn't know. But I've watched a lot of podcasts and interviews and stuff with him, and they've maybe not want to watch any podcasts or interviews with him. He's always been very I don't know, very sure of himself, which isn't a bad thing. But in the way I'm implying, it comes off a little rough, and him pulling a move like this just doesn't seem that surprising to me. It's um, on one hand, it's I suspect this company sold him on this idea and probably flashed a nice number in front of him to do it. On the other hand, I was watching Kind of Funny, and they were like, yeah, like, that he probably got kind of tricked into this, and they gave him a very they treated him with kid hands, or whatever. And I think he knows. I think he knew exactly what this was. I just don't think he cares about the pushback. I think he knows that the way this stuff works, he's prolific. He has probably already plenty of money. Some people will pay for this, even if it's like, I mean, like, this isn't gonna be like a $20 NFT. This is gonna be like tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars to get his voice. Like, that's gonna be a big deal for whoever gets it. And I really, I'm not willing to like feel to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he knew exactly what this was. This pushback on this stuff has been going on for a long time. Crypto in general, blockchain stuff in general, and especially in the last couple months, NFT stuff. Troy Baker is on video game podcast, and he's in this world. The podcast he's on just did an episode about this last week and ripped it apart, NFT stuff. He wasn't on it. He supposedly had something else to do. My guess is he knew he was going to be putting this announcement out and didn't want to have his face on this anti NFT podcast, and made sure he was busy that day. But that's just my little conspiracy theory. But I I don't know. I think this seems super shady. It's the thing I keep seeing people say, and this is kind of where I stand with it, is that the theoretical potential of NFTs and blockchain and all this, um, there's probably something reasonable there. The problem is that that doesn't seem to be coming through. What seems to be coming through right now are a handful of people who understand this more than most others, who realize that there's a very short window here where they're going to be able to make a quick buck. They're going to be able to make a bunch of money really quickly off of a bunch of rubes who don't know what they're talking about, and but that are excited about it. And we're dealing with a lot of opportunism right now, a lot of opportunistic people. And maybe 10 years from now, NFTs and blockchain, all this, it'll probably be called something different, will be a regular thing. But right now it's not. And the things that are happening, these crappy pieces of art people are buying, this idea of this voice AI NFT thing, which let's see this, and I want to actually see this demonstrated too. They're just saying that they're doing this thing. I have a very hard time believing this will be even worth having, because Troy Baker's voice is obviously his business, his job. But just because you can type a thing onto a screen, and an AI can recreate those words with his voice, doesn't mean it's going to. When I mean, he's a voice actor. He isn't he gets a part. He reads up on the background of that part. He reads the script and all of the lines he's going to be saying, and then he performs them. So he performs a line that's a tragic situation, and he's you know someone is dying in front of him. This AI, this little NFT thing, may have a sad setting, but it won't be able to perform the way he will. He's a human. He understands these emotions. He can put himself in that situation, and perform these lines in a way that wins him awards and has won him tons of money and this opportunity to do this NFT, right? And I just have a feeling that this thing it's gonna sound like your Google Maps voice, where it like sounds pretty good, but it's obviously not like a real person who's actually talking and performing. So I think this was a pretty bad move by Troy, but I'm not gonna act like this is a surprising move by him. It kind of seems right up his alley, if you want me to be totally honest. But maybe I'm a big dumb dumb, and I should mind my business and not be so judgmental. I don't know. Let me know what you think. The next story is Dying Light 3. Um, so wait, or is it Dying Light 2? I think it's Dying Light 2. I'm gonna look real quick. This is a little look behind the it's Dying Light 2. Okay. So they put out a tweet and it was really interesting. I definitely caught some flack for it. Where they put out this tweet and they said it's going to take you 500 hours to beat this game, and I quote tweeted it like, "Hey, like that sounds awful. Like that sounds like a job, not a game." And so a bunch of people jumped on me. My favorite part was how many people would be like, "Well, how many hours do you have in the division?" Look, you're talking about a single player story based video game that I'm not under the impression is supposed to have an end game, or it's not a looter shooter. Um, and I haven't even played the division consistently in like 2 years, like just to be straight up. Like it's basically since Warlords of New York. So I'm obviously not really into that anymore, or at least not for now. And so there was a bunch of pushback similar to mine. And then they put out another thing that was like, okay. So it's 500 hours to explore everything, to collect everything. It's probably about 80 hours to do uh, the all of the side missions in the main story, and about 20 hours for just the main story. And that's when everyone comes back down to earth a little bit. And okay, well that's more reasonable. And I agree. 20 hours to finish the main story. If you blow through it, that's pretty good. If that's all like very story based, has cinematics, like it's very it's going. 20 hours is a good campaign. I am still curious. They put that out there, but the way these games work, like if you played the last couple of Assassin's Creed games, like yeah, if you do all of the main story content, it might be like 20 hours, but Assassin's Creed was level gated heavily. And so yeah, like the story took 20 hours, but you had to play 60, 70, 80 hours to have your character at the levels you had to be at to be able to continue the story. And so I'm really curious if Dying Light 2 is going to be like that as well. I don't know. I never played Dying Light 1. I actually think I did play it for like an hour or two and just wasn't into it. I was and I am interested in Dying Light 2 for sure. It's not like a game I've been like waiting with bated breath for, but I'm curious. But yeah, so we'll see about that. Um I do want to mind my P's and Q's here. The person who I mentioned last week, who I put in to do a Mass Effect podcast, is a comm dev for Dying Light 2. I'm really not trying to dog on it. I think the messaging was maybe not. I think now we realize in hindsight that I think people are just getting kind of sick of bloated games, and I say this as a former Ubisoft star player, someone who's a big fan of the Division. Even I don't think the Division is that bloated, but maybe I'm just biased. But when you look at games like Wildlands, Ghost Recon, and Breakpoint, you look at games like Odyssey and Valhalla, and Assassin's Creed. Origins wasn't that bad. It was not quite as, but these games, you have these games that are just, they're so bloated. Yeah. There's 1,000 hours of gameplay in these games, right? Okay, but it's not like interesting gameplay. It's like 15 to 20 hours of interesting gameplay and then just crap. Like I'm just gonna call it what it is, just crap. I will say it sounds like Assassin's Creed has some like really good side missions and quests and stuff like that. But like at the end of the day, it's just it's a lot of bloat. And I think that it feels so 10 years ago for games to be like, there's 1,000 hours. You can play this game for 1,000 hours. Where at one point that sounded really exciting, right? Like at one point, like, oh my God, I'm gonna get lost in this world. And now in hindsight, we're kind of like, okay, there's a bunch of stuff that I'm not gonna want to do, but I'm gonna have to do it. And that's the way that game goes now. That's the way the games go right now. And I hope we're on the back end of that. I hope that, seeing things like the Star Wars Fallen Order game, seeing games like Guardians of the Galaxy, and some of these experiences that have come out in the last couple of years, where it doesn't have to be a game as a service. It doesn't have to be a looter shooter. It doesn't have to have 500 hours of content. People are happy to take a game that has like 10, 15, 20, 30 hours of content. And if it's really good, they'll come back and play it. And I think people are just getting kind of exhausted with this like almost like asking people to play games as part of their job, which is also an issue with some of the NFT stuff that's going on, but I won't get back into that, at least not yet. And so I saw a lot of takes, people like, especially people clapping back at me, like with Division 2 stuff. These are people that must not have been paying attention to me for the last 2 years because I have definitely gone away from those types of games. Me like Mass Effect, I would not put in that category, not even close. In fact, it actually kind of blows my mind that the Mass Effect trilogy is so old, yet I haven't found a game who does things the way they do it, not as compelling, at least in my opinion, for whatever that's worth. So, yeah, Dying Light 2, I'm sure it's gonna be a great game. It looks great. I would like to play it at some point. But I definitely think that we saw at least a little bit of the situation where I think people, like I said, I think people are just getting kind of tired of being, of these games that they don't come out in good shape. They come out bloated. They come out, wanting, but somehow they still, brag about having hundreds of hours of gameplay. So Dying Light 2, I'm sure it's gonna be really cool. I'm curious to what you think about it. Let me know on YouTube, Twitter, and my Discord, whatever. Let's chat. A little tiny story here next is State of Decay 3. I'm a huge State of Decay 2 stan, especially at this point. That game has just been iterated on. I think, let's say from the last gen, from the PS4, Xbox One generation, I think State of Decay 2 is the best supported game I'm aware of. Um, and it's not that popular, but Undead Labs has just put so much time, and they're so connected with their community. Their community doesn't love everything they do. I'm involved, and people don't love everything they do, but man, like they do these like weekly shows where they show you like the end game. They pull up dev builds and show people what they're working on. They just did it this week with a new update they're working on still for State of Decay 2. Um, State of Decay, it's so cool. The first one was great. The second one was a lot different, and it was lacking in some areas that they're adding back. Um, but it's such a great game, so fun. And then now State of Decay 3. So they are doing a bunch of hiring. It looks like they're hiring a bunch of high level and mid and low level positions. And so I suspect that some of the stuff they're doing on State of Decay 2, 2 now is probably wrapping that game up. And if they're hiring big right now, I suspect by this summer they're probably going to be in full development of State of Decay 3, which we've only seen a cinematic trailer. We really don't know anything about it. It looks like it's going to take place in winter, which I think is new. I don't think that's happened before, or it very well may take place in multiple seasons. Who knows? Um, but if they are starting full development this spring or this summer, I would anticipate probably a 2-year dev cycle on that, and we would probably see it in 2024, which is super exciting. And I hope so. Obviously, 2023 would be really cool. But if they're only going to start full development this year, I anticipate it'll be 2 years at least of development for that game. And there's so much other stuff coming from Xbox. They probably have that time. So very exciting news for State of Decay 3. Next bit of news here is some updates on the code name Sony project Spartacus. This is the Game Pass competitor that Sony is allegedly working on. This week they pulled PlayStation Now cards from retail stores. I believe they were over in Britain, Great Britain, at the Game stores, which is like their equivalent of GameStop. And it's just led to a lot of speculation. People think that if they're pulling PlayStation Now cards off the shelf, that probably means that the replacement is coming, which is anticipated to be this codename Spartacus thing. Um, the rumors about that is that it's not going to be exactly like Game Pass. It's going to have more of a Game Pass feel, but it still won't have day one exclusives. So Ragnarok or any of these other games that come out will not be day one. You'll still have to buy them. I bet they do like a discount. You get like $10 off or something if you have this service. And there's a lot of talk that right now PlayStation Now requires that you stream, most of the games on there. I think there's some downloads, but you have to stream most of it, especially PS3 games, and that there's basically like no PS2 games. But the PS3 games have to be streamed because the PS3 used a cell processor that was proprietary and it wasn't x86 based, which is what PCs are. The last two generations of systems have been the generations before the PS3 and 360. The original Xbox and the PS2, I believe, were x86, and basically there's just a compatibility issue. So, the regular systems, these systems simply can't play those games the way they were designed. They don't work. It's like trying to put, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good comparison. Vegetable oil in your Prius. It's not. It can't run it. It's not compatible. So, yeah, I suspect. I mean, this has to be coming sooner or later. Um, while like before, I said that PlayStation is going to kick butt with their system sales. If this is true, what's coming, they aren't going to go all in because they don't have to. Xbox is trying to make up ground. PlayStation has the ground. So I would never expect their answer to Game Pass to be a full Game Pass clone. I think they know that they can keep charging for their day ones. I think they know that they don't have to do that much to make their player base happy, and to feel like they're getting like their version of the other guy's thing. And I think that's what this is going to be. I think it's going to be a lightly castrated version of Game Pass, and I think most Sony fans will be perfectly fine with that. Honestly, and I think that's okay. What is nice about it is to see it as a hint that Xbox is putting pressure on Sony, and what people need to realize, the whole console war thing is stupid. If anything, what's most annoying about the console war is that we shouldn't be arguing about which one's better, but we should really be pushing them to compete, because a big part of the problem with the PS4 and Xbox One generation was that PlayStation just dominated so heavily. I can't really think of any notable Xbox One exclusives. I love Xbox. Couldn't care. Couldn't care less. And Sony, I mean, they have a litany of them, right? And so what sucks about the last generation is I think it set us back like 10 years in game development, because obviously Sony put out great games, God of War and Horizon and these games, but they kind of stuck to their formula because they could, because they weren't getting any competition. Xbox stepped on its own foot day one, and they recovered. And I think by the end of the generation, I think the series or the Xbox One X is a much better hardware than the PlayStation Pro, even a 4 Pro, but it still just didn't have the games. It was an incredible piece of hardware. I loved my One X. It was incredible. It was great, but it still, it played those third party games the best. But you can have a PC and do that, or even the PlayStation 4 Pro was still great. So what we should be rooting for, instead of arguing about which one's better, we can have our preferences. Who cares? I don't care. Well, I don't care what you prefer. Let's be very clear about that. But we should really be talking about them competing, because this resurgence of Xbox is going to push PlayStation further. They're going to probably vary some of their games more. We might see something other than a third person adventure action game. They might start doing some other stuff. They might try to do something like a Halo, or they really might push more into Gran Turismo and try to make it a lot better, or do like an arcadey version of Gran Turismo. I don't know, to go off with Horizon. But the last gen really let PlayStation get comfy in what they're good at. And that's fine, and obviously people loved it, but I think in the long run it's not good for games. And I'm really hoping that what they're doing with this Project Spartacus and stuff is a sign that Xbox is forcing Sony to try. So we'll have to see how that goes. Second to last story here is Grand Theft Auto 6. There's a GameSpot story here talking about that there could be a Grand Theft Auto 6 as early as 2023. And what that comes from is Take-Two was recently purchased by a big conglomerate, giant company, and as part of that, they have a bunch of financial disclosures they have to put out. And one of the financial disclosures is talking about that in 2023, at some point, they're expecting a 14 to 15%, I believe, boost in profits. For a game company, a 14 to 15% boost is gigantic. And when it comes to Take Two, the only conceivable game, the only conceivable product that they could put out that would give them that huge of a burst is Grand Theft Auto 6. Um, is that what's going to happen? Who knows? Maybe there's a bully game in the making, or maybe this was misread. Maybe the documents weren't completely accurate timeline wise and stuff. But um, I mean, those documents have to be pretty legit for this big sale to go through. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's true. And if you remember when they announced Red Dead Redemption 2, I can't remember exactly how long it was from the first announcement to the release of the game, but it wasn't long. And they very well could announce, Grand Theft Auto 6 this winter or early next year and release it next year. And that wouldn't surprise me at all. So be on the lookout for that, and we'll see if we get any more news about it. And we're gonna wrap it up here with some good home eating, some good comfy story. I'm gonna talk about the division because, yeah, because I have to. This isn't a division podcast anymore, but I know what you people want. I know. So, and I like talking about it. So, I put up a big a poll this week where I posted something, or no, actually it was just a tweet. It wasn't a poll, and I just said, "Hey, like, there's this timeline. There's this event that happens, and by now I don't think it's spoilers anymore. Fei Lao, the manhunt it's currently ongoing, I believe. They're rerunning all of the manhunts, and the current one, Fei Lao, the final mission takes place. Go figure at Camp David or whatever they call it in the game. I can't even remember. I think it's the third different mission we play there. There's like three variants of it because there's the regular one, the invaded one, and now this new manhunt mission. And what happens in the mission, spoilers, I guess, if you still haven't played it, but I hope you have by now, is you find out that Fei Lao is there with President Ellis, who we know has been exposed as working for the Black Tusk, to basically subvert the division and to try to give them power over the country. And we go there to get them, to get both of them. We want to get Faye back because she went rogue. We want to get Ellis because he's the head of the division, and we need to figure out what's going on there. And you show up, and you get about halfway through the mission, or a little more towards the end, and you find that Faye killed Ellis. Um, and subsequent voice messages you get if you play the mission over and over again, you get some voice messages she left for various people from the original game. And you find out that she says, "Yeah, I wasn't really rogue, guys. I just knew that was the only way I could get in. I knew I needed to take out Ellis." I have taken that as her saying, like, we need to get rid of Ellis so someone who actually wants to complete the division's mission will be assigned, ownership of the division, because it's whoever's next in line. Now, that's what we'll talk about in a minute. So you find out Ellis is dead, the president's dead. You then pursue Fei Lao. There was a cinematic that came out before this manhunt when it originally dropped a year ago, whatever, and it implied that after you find him dead, you confront her, and like there's a cinematic where you go up and you go to punch her. Your agent does, and that doesn't show up in this mission. That doesn't happen. So my speculation has always been that we were probably supposed to capture Fei Lao at this point, and then they just couldn't finish the mission. They couldn't finish the cinematic, or they couldn't get voice acting or whatever. Something happened where instead of doing this thing that makes sense, we go and we kill Fei Lao. So my thing I posted about was talking about with the division is that we have a bunch of these open storylines. This main one being who's going to take over after Ellis. So who's next in line to be president that they can find and is still alive. And I mean that it'll be interesting how far down the line they have to go. And then will they activate a third wave of division agents? Because what we've learned in this manhunt with Fei Lao is that there's a rogue called Viper, and she actually was a division agent before the dollar flu happened, and she was never activated. And so as we have speculated, or as we know, I don't really want to say one way or the other, The first wave was activated in New York and around the world, or at least around the country, and that didn't go well. And that was Keener and some others. And then the second wave was activated, and that was Division One. We played as a second wave agent. They brought in reinforcements. We came in, and it seems like from the books and the comics and the games, they kind of got the situation like mostly under control. And then Black Tusk comes up, and this PMC whatever, being controlled by all these people that we'll probably learn more about later. But the second wave comes in and cleans up a lot of the first wave, gets most places, it seems like, somewhat under control. But what we know is that there's a large number of agents not activated, and they were never activated, I think, because then Ellis took control. Ellis was working with Black Tusk, and the Black Tusk was telling him, you cannot let anyone activate the rest of the agents. Because for all we know, there's a whole nother, maybe only half the agents were activated. And when I mentioned this in this tweet, someone responded like, well, hey, like, what are those agents doing? Like, they aren't just sitting around their apartment waiting to get called up. And that's correct. We know that from Viper. She was waiting, and then she decided to take things into her own hands because she didn't get activated. And what you have to realize is that, yeah, obviously these agents, for good or bad, are going to go out. They're going to try to survive, and they're going to try to do what they can do for themselves and for their family and whatever. But just because they have all this training, if they aren't activated as a division agent, they don't have Isaac. They don't have all the shade tech. They don't have access to the caches and all this infrastructure that the division has to help agents do what they do. And so what I'm hoping is that whoever takes over for Ellis, whoever they discover or find or whatever happens there, is that person says, are there more agents? Like, are there people who haven't been activated? And they go, yeah, there's a ton of them. And they hit that activation on everyone who's left. And then that brings in some really cool things about, like, the people who have potentially gone rogue, people who are dead, people, civilians. I don't want to spoil anything, but that Recruited book that just came out, that title is very telling about what the book is about. And so if there's civilians who have kind of earned their way, we know that, even in the Division Two, like, our main, the other agent we deal with the most is someone who was recruited after this whole situation began. She was brought into the division afterwards. So I think that's a really cool line that hopefully will be addressed in the content that's coming, or in a DLC one day, or in a Division 3 if that ever happens, maybe in a spin-off game. I don't know. But I'm really curious about that. And then we have a couple other things too. The bioreactor and Chernenko. The whole point of the Pentagon DLC or episode was that we recovered this bioreactor that could mass produce an antiviral, and it could be quickly adjusted. So even if the dollar flu replicates and turns into a different virus, which is, art reflecting real life, they could deal with that. And then in the Coney Island DLC or episode 3, we captured Chernenko, who can actually use this technology to help us. But then nothing happened. If you go to the White House right now, you can go into the bioreactor room. Chernenko's not there. He's nowhere to be found. And that thing's just in there just humming away. And, they've it seems like they've dropped that storyline. I would like to see more. And then the other big one is that in the third manhunt, we captured Schaefer, like Barden Schaefer, one of the highest up people in Black Tusk. We defeated him and brought him in, and he's with us. And there's been comms and stuff that lead me to believe that he may be willing to switch sides and help out the division and help out against Black Tusk. And then, in the fourth manhunt, that just disappeared. We got no more information about it. So, man, I like, they're deep down, I've got hope that they're eventually going to address all these things, and that it's going to be a topic to cover at some point, whether it's a new game, if they ever make another game, or whether it's going to be DLC or books or whatever. Maybe Rawson's movie is going to be about Barden Schaefer. Probably not. I think it's going to be about the first wave agents, but we'll have to wait and see about that. So there it is. There's that. We'll do some listener questions. We've got Master Prime, reliable as always, with a few questions. Thoughts on the 360 Halo servers shutting down. Um, I mean, Microsoft has more money than God. So the only reason I can think that they're shutting down the 360 Halo servers, yeah, the people have to keep in mind that the Master Chief Collection has been on the Xbox One and now the Series consoles. Um, there just can't be that many people left playing on the 360. I know that before they shut down, there's people all getting together and playing on it to get achievements and stuff. They're going to be gone forever, which is really cool. But they don't have to shut these down, and I think the only reason they would be is that there's so few people playing that it's not even worth keeping up a little bit. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it probably just means that the the generate 2 generations ago console just isn't being played very much because I have to imagine that 360s are there can't be that many functional ones left at this point, even after they fix the red ring of death problem. I surely can't imagine that there's that many of them still kicking out there. So I don't think it's a big deal. What is better in the long run for a game? A focus on competitive player base or casual player base? So my only issue here is that I think to I think I would replace competitive with like dedicated or something, because competitive, I mean, you can be a casual competitive player of a game. So do you focus on a minority of really serious players of your video game, or do you focus on the majority of more casual people? So the division, I'm gonna bring it up because it's the game I know the best here. If I remember from the Division One, and I suspect this is true with Division Two, the average play time. So there were 10 plus million copies of Division Two and One sold, and probably many more than that at this point. The average play time is like 10 or 15 hours, I think. And whereas like Division One, I had like 4,000 hours, and then Division Two, I think I have around like 750 or 800. Um, and in Division Two, I haven't even played that much. I played it really seriously for like 1 year, and then I haven't played it much since then. But I probably still have 7 times the hours of most players, right? And it's tough because you have to focus on both. You have to acknowledge that there's people who are going to play through the main story of your game, maybe half of that, and leave it. I think what people don't recognize in the division community, people who are still involved with the division are weird, including myself. But we aren't normal. Like 95% of division players, eh, maybe less than that, but I bet that number's not too far off. Most division players bought it, played it for a couple weeks, beat the main story, played with their friends a little bit, and then Call of Duty came out or something came out and they went to that. But they look back at the division like, oh yeah, that was pretty cool. And maybe they came back a couple times when content did come out. Maybe they did check it out, like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then they went back to playing whatever they were playing. Like people need to realize that like the reason the Division 2 and the greater scheme of things has a pretty good reputation among gamers is that not everyone tries to play for 1,000 hours. Not everyone tries to play for 2,000 hours. Most of them haven't played the game in 2 years, but they still have a positive outlook on the game. And so I think you do have to really, yeah, I think you have to try to cater to both of those. And one thing I think that games, especially games that are meant to be like game as a service, like long term playing games, what they don't do very well is communicate to their dedicated players, to their 1,000 hour players, that, hey, we will not be making enough content to keep you busy 24/7. Mr. Streamer Man, we cannot make 8 hours a day, 6 days a week of content for you. It's not going to happen. Like, we won't be doing that. It's maybe in like 3 years, we'll have content that can sustain that for a while, but not today, not day one. That's not going to happen. And I think that there's an issue there. Like, I think a game like the Division 2 um, actually treated the casual player pretty well in that first year, especially. Um, and then obviously the people who I know, people like me and others who wanted to play that game as their main game to know life forever, that didn't work because, well, not many games can satisfy that. And I think games like Destiny 2 and things like that try, but they don't even succeed. And then a game like the Division 2, like, it didn't try it. As much as people want to believe that these games are meant to be played endlessly, the Division 2 isn't. I've been told by a dev specifically, that they it was intended to play until you were done, until you felt satisfied, until you felt bored, and then you would leave. And then when they put out more content, you would come back. So yeah. So I think you need to focus on both. Unfortunately, that's my answer. Your last question for Master Prime is thoughts on games. Thoughts on games stop being on the disc and requiring a download. Is gaming ownership disappearing? It's gone. Gaming ownership has been gone forever. It's been gone since the last generation. As an example, I haven't purchased a game disc since the 360 era. I never purchased a single disc on the Xbox One, and I haven't purchased one. And I'm not going to on the Series X and whatever comes after that. So I haven't owned any of the games I've purchased for the last, oh, when that come out, like 9 years or something. So, because even if you buy a disc, you don't. I can't think of any games, no mainstream games, where when you go to GameStop or Walmart or whatever, and you buy that disc, that you can put that disc into your console, not plugged into the internet, and play it. Whether it's because there's essential day one patches, whether it's because games are always on where they have to have an internet connection to play at all, or whether it's that that disc for most games nowadays is essentially just a code, is essentially a proof of ownership. And you put that disc in, it says, yep, this person owns this, and then you download it. And then that's how you play. And so I, I think that game ownership is gone. And I think it's been gone for a long time, in fact. And and then services like Game Pass and stuff are only further pushing that, right? Because not only, every Game Pass game I have on my Xbox right now, I didn't pay for it other than paying for a subscription. And if I stop paying for that subscription, I don't get that game anymore. So I don't own it even in that sense. And then you add in the issue of what I just talked about as well, is that you can't unplug your system and play those games. At least most of them you can't. So I think that ship sailed a long time ago, and I don't expect that to change. And that's been a really interesting thing that people have brought up with NFTs. They're like, you could use NFTs for game ownership, and what they're saying is that essentially you could buy a game and it would be an NFT. So you buy your copy of the game; it's unique to you. And the idea is that game publishers are going to jump on to this NFT thing and say Ubisoft, say the Division 2 was sold as a blockchain tracked NFT to me. It could say that once I'm done playing it, once I don't want to play it anymore, I could sell my copy to someone else. And the way that that would work is that like 10% of that transaction would go back to Ubisoft. Ubisoft is never going to do that, because you have to realize that these hardware manufacturers and software makers, that's essentially what GameStop was doing, or kind of. But what GameStop would do is you'd buy a game, and the studio would get that money, the publisher would, their cut, and then you would sell your game to GameStop, and then they would sell it to someone else, and that cut out the publishers completely. So the idea with this NFT thing, with this disc and or digital thing, is that they would at least get a little cut. But why would they? Why would they want that? Because especially with GameStop going to the shitter, going away, essentially, would a game publisher rather get your little 10% of your transaction to someone else, or would they rather just sell that person the full game? I mean, even if they're only charging 10 or 15 bucks for that game, that's probably more money than they're going to make from your little 10%, you know, gift to them, fee, whatever it is. So yeah, I think game ownership has been gone for a long time. I don't think NFTs are going to change that. And I suspect that we may never truly own a game again. Because here's one last thing I'll point out: games like the Division 1 and 2, and games, anything that's online required, especially the Division games, because they use the server infrastructure not just to validate, but to run the AI and to do and to store your character, to do a bunch of stuff. One day, the Division 1 servers will get shut down, and you'll never be able to play Division 1 again, and your character will be gone. It will be like it never happened. So let that sink in. And that's the reality of the future of these games. Hopefully they keep up these servers for 15 years. Who knows? But it will all be gone one day. I promise. Okay, content updates, nothing real big. From a personal standpoint, we did just have to replace our furnace and air conditioner and everything down there, which was a pretty penny. So, if you're willing to support my the podcast through Patreon, or to gift some subs, or to sub over on Twitch or something like that, I'd appreciate anything right now. I'm sure Bay Diesel would as well. So, if you're able, that would be super duper cool. If you do it through Patreon, one thing I will throw out about Patreon with my Extra Life is the first month of any Patreon uh, membership, I will match to Patreon. So if you join the Patreon for $10, I will put that first $10 to the Extra Life, and then we'll treat it like normal after that. So do keep that in mind as well if you decide to be a patron. Patrons do get this episode a few days early, and I am going to try to start doing some more stuff for my patrons who are very dedicated and lovely. Other than that, I was on a break this week, essentially from content. Bay Diesel is super duper busy, and it was just easier to just take the week off and just kind of go with the flow. So streams will begin again next week. There's also not any games I really want to stream right now, and yeah, we'll see when that changes. So you may be seeing more Tarkov, The Division, and maybe Mass Effect, which has been kind of the plan for the last year. So we'll see. And that's where I'm gonna wrap this one up. So I do stream on Twitch over at twitch.tv/bondiesel. I also post this podcast, stream VODs, and narrative game videos and other stuff over on YouTube as Bondiesel. If you are on Discord, please check out the description below or my Twitter to join the EchoCast Discord server. Check out my Twitter at Bondiesel, or the podcast Twitter at the EchoCast. If you want some cool The EchoCast or Bondiesel merch, check out designbyhumans.com/shop/Bondiesel or streamlabs.com/Bondiesel/merch. That's all I have. So until next time.